All right, we're going deep today. I mean, way down below the surface of the consciousness iceberg. This is where we get into some of the most mind-ending, reality-warping theories in all of science and philosophy. These are ideas that could fundamentally change how you see, well, everything. It all really boils down to this one question. It seems so simple, but it's just unbelievably profound. Let's just forget about brain scans and neurons for a second. Why do you have an inner life at all? Why does it feel like anything to be you? Why isn't it just dark inside? This is the core mystery we're diving into. Now, that mystery actually has a name. And believe me, it's a big one. So let's start with what some people call the single biggest thorn in the side of modern science and philosophy, the hard problem. So there's this philosopher, David Chalmers, and he framed this perfectly. He separated what he called the easy problems, things like how we focus our attention or how our brain controls our behavior, from the one single hard problem. See, we can imagine eventually mapping out every single neuron and understanding how the brain works. But how do you explain the leap from all that biological machinery to the actual personal feeling of seeing the color red or tasting a fresh piece of chocolate? That jump from mechanism to experience, that's the hard problem. And to really get our heads around the hard problem, we need to zoom in on the building blocks of that inner world. We need to talk about the raw feel of experience itself. Philosophers have a special word for this, qualia. It sounds kind of fancy, but the idea is actually super simple. It's just the what it's likeness of any experience you have. It's not the description of the feeling, it is the feeling. Just think about it for a second. The very specific quality of redness that you're seeing right now, the particular sting of a paper cut, or the savory, cheesy deliciousness of a good slice of pizza. Those aren't just data points your brain is processing. They are private, internal, subjective experiences. That's qualia. And this is where things get really weird with this classic thought experiment. How do you know for sure that the color you experience as red isn't what I experience as blue? I mean, think about it. We both learn to call a stop sign red. Our brains are both processing the exact same wavelength of light, but our inner private qualia, they could be totally different. And the crazy part is, we would never, ever be able to find out. So this puzzle creates this huge split in philosophy. On one side, you've got qualia realists. They say these subjective feelings are totally real, maybe as fundamental as electrons or gravity. But on the other side, you have illusionists, like the philosopher Daniel Dennett. They argue that this whole idea of qualia, it's a kind of trick our brain plays on itself. That once you fully explain how the brain processes information, there's no extra magic of subjective feeling left over to explain. It's just an illusion. Okay, so since trying to get consciousness out of regular matter is so incredibly difficult, some theories take a really radical turn. They ask, what if we've got it completely backwards? What if consciousness doesn't pop out of matter, but what if consciousness is actually the foundation of reality itself? Now, one of the oldest and most powerful versions of this idea comes from Advaita Vedanta, a school of Hindu philosophy. The word Advaita literally means not two, and it proposes this profound idea of non-dualism, that your individual consciousness, what they call Atman, is not actually separate from the ultimate total reality of the cosmos, which they call Brahman. In the end, they are one and the same. And right away, you can see how this smacks right up against our everyday common sense, right? We feel like we're a separate person, distinct from the chair we're sitting in, separate from the world out there. But according to this view, that feeling of being a separate self is the grand illusion, a concept they call Maya. The deeper truth is a fundamental underlying unity. Okay, here's another wild idea. It's called Panpsychism. And the logic kind of goes like this. If you can't build consciousness from bits of non-conscious matter, well, maybe consciousness was baked into the matter from the very beginning. Panpsychism is the theory that every particle in the universe has some kind of incredibly simple, rudimentary form of inner experience. Now, this doesn't mean your coffee mug is sitting there thinking deep thoughts. No. It means the fundamental particles that make up the mug have some tiny, tiny spark of subjectivity. But, and this is a huge but, this theory runs into a massive obstacle. It's called the combination problem. Okay, fine. Let's say every little atom has a tiny bit of proto-consciousness. How in the world do all those simple little bits combine to create your single, rich, complex, unified mind? It's kind of like saying you can write a great novel just by piling up a bunch of letters. You're missing the grammar, the sentences, the story that puts it all together. This whole combination problem leads us to a totally different way of thinking. Maybe consciousness isn't a thing we have, like a brain. And maybe it's not a property of atoms. Maybe consciousness is something we do. Maybe it's a process, an activity.
So the philosopher John Vervaeke talks about consciousness this way. He doesn't see it as a thing, but as an active process he calls relevance realization. It's your mind constantly and dynamically sifting through an infinite amount of information to figure out what's relevant right now. And he says we do this through 4 interconnected ways of knowing. There's knowing that something is true, like a fact. There's knowing how to do something, like riding a bike. There's knowing what it's like from a perspective. And finally, there's knowing something by participating in it, by becoming one with the process. For Vervaeke, consciousness is that whole dynamic dance.
And you know, this process-focused idea has really deep roots, especially in Buddhist philosophy. You have the Yogacara school, for example, which suggests that the external world we perceive is actually a construction of our conscious processes. Then the Madhyamaka school goes even a step further. It argues that nothing has any independent, inherent existence. Everything, including your very own sense of self, is just an interdependent, unfolding process. So the you that you feel like you are isn't some solid, static thing. It's a constantly changing pattern of relationships. A more modern scientific take on this is the Global Workspace Theory, and it uses this great metaphor. Think of your mind as a giant theater. The stage is your working memory, your attention is the spotlight, and only whatever is caught in that spotlight becomes conscious. It gets broadcast out to this huge unconscious audience of all the other specialized systems in your brain. In this view, consciousness has a job to do. It's a function. Its purpose is to get everyone on the same page so we can act in a coherent way. Okay, let's shift gears one last time. We've looked at philosophy, we've looked at cognitive science. Let's turn to the psychological, almost spiritual perspective of the great psychologist Carl Jung. Now, at first, Jung's idea of a collective unconscious might sound a lot like that Eastern concept of oneness we talked about. But there is a really, really critical difference. In a view like Vedanta's, you are the ocean, and the feeling of being a separate ripple is the illusion. For Jung, it's different. We are all distinct, individual people, but we're all drawing water from the same deep, ancient, shared well of human memory and archetypes. And understanding that difference reveals the absolute core goal of Jungian psychology. The goal is not to dissolve into oneness. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's a lifelong journey that he called individuation. The whole point is to become more of a distinct, differentiated, and whole individual by consciously wrestling with and integrating all the hidden parts of yourself, your shadow, your potential, into a complete person. This quote from the Jungian analyst James Hollis just nails it. Consciousness, in Jung's view, is not just awareness, but the carrier of meaning. See, for Jung, the ultimate purpose of being conscious isn't just to notice things. Its real job is to create meaning. It's the tool we're given to make sense of our lives, to find our purpose, and to become whole. So, wow, we have taken quite a journey here, haven't we? All the way from individual neurons to the nature of the entire cosmos, from ancient philosophy to the frontiers of modern psychology. Each of these viewpoints gives us a totally different lens to peer through. But the central mystery, it's still there, still unfolding. And I think that leaves us with one final question that really sums up this whole entire journey. What is consciousness really? Is it a problem that we're supposed to solve like some kind of cosmic Rubik's Cube? Is it a dynamic process that we need to understand better and participate in more fully? Or is it the fundamental reality of everything? Something we're just meant to experience more and more deeply. You know, maybe the real answer isn't choosing just one of those. Maybe it's all of them.